All right, good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock and it's time to start. So I'm just going to do a quick moderation here and just do some announcements, and then we'll go over the homework from last night, and then we will proceed to chapters 19, 20, 21. And congratulations, Amanda, for passing your school exam. Good for you. Now, good luck in the state exam. Go get them. All right. So for chapters 16, 17, and 18, which was for homework last night, let's go through the homework answers. After first, I give you some morning announcements. First of all, again, no recording of any classes. If you're leaning towards recording stuff, guys, just so you know, the Real Estate Commission outlaws the recording of any licensing classes at all, audio or visual, so please don't do it. Also, by the way, good morning. If you're joining us today for your first day, my name is Tim Jensen, your instructor. I should have started off that way, but anyway, that's the scoop. Next, please, and please, I want to just remind you nicely, no posting of any links in our chat room. I get to do it, our admins get to do it. If it's a link I posted previously and you feel the need to repost, I wouldn't mind that. But please, guys, don't post anything in our chat room that's not been approved by the school beforehand. We've had problems in the past. We've had to spend a lot of money on technical fixes and repairs by allowing a malware to get in through a certain portal. But again, we just want to avoid posting any links. Also, please, no foul language in our discussions. It's always interesting topics we discuss, but we're all adults, so we can refrain from that. If you're having any connection issues, first off, close out any and all other applications and programs that you have running. That will go a long way in solving any connection issues you may have. There's another way by hitting the little semicircle with the little arrow on it next to your address bar on top of your screen. That can reset your connection, and you'll just have to log in again. But don't worry, if it's only for a minute or two, you won't be penalized. But if it's a half hour, an hour at a time, you're logged out except for the breaks, you're going to have a problem with your attendance. If you have any administrative questions regarding how the school operates, how do I check my hours, where do I get the homework, what about the schedule, anything you have at all, you can always go to recareercenter.com and look up a resource, or you can go and wait. You can just stay online at lunchtime at 12 noon. Lauren or Noel, one of our staff, will come on, and they're very nice people, guys. Always treat them nice. They'll come on and answer any and all of your admin questions you have. Also, if you have any other questions regarding topics in real estate that are not being presented or you need a question on, you can always talk to me after class. I always stick online. If you feel it's a private matter, I always supply my email at the end of the day for your use. But again, at the end of the day, I stick around for any questions, so stick around if you do. We have breaks during the day. At 10:30, we have a coffee break. At 12 noon, we have a lunch break for an hour. At 2:30, we have a coffee break for a half hour, and then we end up the day at 4:30. And as always, I always tell folks, please pre-read this material before you come to class. It makes for a much better discussion. You also then get the benefit of better comprehension, higher retention rate, and you will do much better on an exam if you do. So, no more announcements. Let's go through the homework from last night, and then we'll proceed on to chapters 19, 20, and 21 today. So for homework last night, chapter 16, the homework answers are number 1, B for boy, 2, A, 3C, 4A, 5, B as in boy, 6, B as in boy, 7, D for dog, 8, B for boy, 9, D for dog, and 10, C. Again, chapter 16, homework questions are number 1, B, boy, 2, A, 3, C, 4, A, 5, B, boy, 6, B, boy, 7, D, dog, 8D, dog. Excuse me, 8 was B, boy. Pardon me. 8 was B, boy. 9 was D, dog. And 10 was C. For chapter 17, the homework answers are number 1, A. 2, B as in boy. 3, B as in boy. 4, B as in boy. 5, C. 6, C. 7, C. 8, B as in boy. 9, C. And 10, B as in boy. Again, chapter 17 homework answers are 1A, 2B boy, 3B boy, 4B boy, 5C, 6C, 7C, 8B boy, 9C, and 10B boy. For chapter 18, the answers to the homework questions are as follows. Number 1, C. Number 2, D as in dog. Number 3, A. Number 4, C. Number 5, C. Number 6, C. Number 7, C. Oh, sorry, check that. Let me do 18 again. My mistake. I just screwed up. Chapter 18, the answers are number 1, C. 2, D for dog. 3, A. 4, C. 5, C. 6, A. 7, C. 8, C. 9, B boy. And 10, D. Before I start chapter 19, was there any questions on last night's homework before we move on? Chapter 16, number 8. Let me pull it up. 16, number 8. Both licensed and certified residential appraisers may conduct appraisals of residential properties that are valued of what? No more than $1 million. The answer would be B for boy. For chapter 16, number 8. It does say that in the book, in the description. Go over question 3, chapter 16. The 2 characteristics of real estate that govern the way the market reacts to supply and demand are uniqueness and mobility. C. Can you give answers to chapter 15 again? Guys, we're not going to do it again. All the homework all the homework questions are on your website. You can always access that. 18.8. 18.8 was C. 16.10 was C. I think I got all the questions, so let me moderate the conversation, and we will now move on to chapter 19, 20, and 21. So give me just a second while I get organized here. I will be right with you. All right. Chapter 19, legal descriptions and deeds. That's what we're going to be talking about this morning. So at the end of this chapter, you should be able to discuss the 3 methods of describing real property. There are actually more than 3, but the book wants you to know about 3. And identify the types of deeds used in New Jersey and the effects of various clauses and deeds. All right, so first of all, legal descriptions. Very important when selling property, guys, is the ability to describe the real property that's being sold or conveyed. So in a description of real estate, it must be very precise. Deeds require the most precise legal description of property when conveying that property. So a deed is a document that conveys title rights to property and has to include a description, the most precise description. Land can be described in three methods: meets and bounds descriptions, rectangular survey systems, or recorded plat of subdivisions. We're going to discuss all three of those. There are others, but we don't really use them that much. However, we do, in fact, use one other when listing real estate and using sales contracts, and that would be the street address and associated lot and block number. So those are the plat plan subdivision recordings of the buildings and numbers of lots and the descriptions therein. We are going to talk about that. Another way would be boundary descriptions or monument descriptions or tax identification number references. A tax ID number is found on your tax bill. It's like a 16 sequential number on top of your tax bill. That's a way of describing your property if you can relate it into tax identification numbers, but it doesn't really give us a very good understanding. You have to go look that up to reference it. A boundary description is describing what's on the edges of your property. And a monument description is something that is used either natural or man-made objects that mark delineating territories. The Rio Grande River could be a monument description or a boundary description of land. The only problem with a boundary description or a monument description is that sometimes it doesn't last forever. Sometimes it gets destroyed, moves, burns down, something happens. So if I gave you a description of my farm back in 1865 out in Kansas, I say, well, you go down the road a piece until you hit the hanging tree. That's where it starts my property. Then it goes down to Johnson's barn, but as soon as you hit Johnson's barn, that's where my property ends. And then you got to go back to the river. And from both points, that hanging tree and the barn, if you go back to the river, there's a big rock that marks the end of my property. And on the other corner, there's the fenced-in pen for where we brand the cattle. That's a boundary and monument description. However, during the civil unrest of 1875, the hanging tree got burned down and it no longer exists. Johnson moved his barn to another place on his field, and that rock was used as cobble when they banged it up and put it into little pieces and made a street out of it. So now the monuments are gone. The boundaries may or not be able to be described. So how's my property going to be described? Very tough to do. So today in New Jersey, the most precise way to describe property is from a meets and bounds description. Apparently there's a question or two. So Gary, what's your question? Gary Keating. Nada. Okay, guys, your keyboards are open. It looks like you're asking questions. That's why I'm pausing. So if there are no questions, then please, guys, keep your mouses off your keyboards until you do. All right. So monument and boundary descriptions are the same? Similar, yes. They're very similar. Okay. So let's talk about these three descriptions that we use in real estate. First is the most precise method of describing real property. It's called the meets and bounds description. This uses boundaries and measurements of land as borderlines. How do they determine that? First of all, a meets and bounds description always starts at what is known as a point of beginning. Usually a commonly accepted spot where many surveys start from. So let's take the intersection of a street. It's a little, middle class residential neighborhood. And all of a sudden, some guy comes in and subdivides the property, puts these streets and says, at this point on the corner of the south side of Long Street and the east side of, Right Way, on the right side, the east side of Right Way and the south side of Long Street, at that intersection is the point of beginning, POB. Then they'll make a description moving clockwise around the property and always come back to the point of beginning. So in your book on page 322, there's a figure 19.1 where it shows the meets and bounds tract. And I'm going to read the description, and if you can follow along on that little figure map, you can follow where the boundaries are. So here comes the description. Beginning at the intersection of the east line of Jones Road and the south line of Skull Drive, where that little X is, you can see where it says point of beginning. Then please follow clockwise around the lot. Thence, east along the south line of Skull Drive, 200 feet. Okay. Thence, and when they say thence, that means like change direction or proceed in a certain way. Thence, south, 15 degrees east, 216.5 feet more or less, to the center thread of Red Skull Creek. Thence, northwesterly along the center line of said creek to its intersection with the east line of Jones Road. Thence, north 105 feet more or less along the east line of Jones Road to the place of beginning. So that little sliver of land was described in the meets and bounds description by starting at a point of beginning, working clockwise around the property and meeting back up at the point of beginning. Did anybody not understand how that meets and bounds description works? I see a couple people typing, so I will wait. I wouldn't object to reviewing that one. I'm not sure what that references to. Point of beginning, how can you find it if there's no monument? Again, as I said, it's usually on that instance, and I'll draw one again. Let me use the whiteboard again. A roadway intersection, right? Many surveyors will use a common point of beginning for all legal descriptions. So if there's a description on this lot, right, then you go from the point of beginning around the lot, clockwise back to the point of beginning. Then the next lot would start at the same point of beginning, except we go thence proceed to the second point of beginning, thence east along this line to a certain point, then south, and then west, and then north again, back to the second point of beginning or beginning point of this lot. So in other words, there's a common indicator that may be the reference point for many surveys on one block. So this one may start south along this line, starting at this point of beginning, then proceeding west or east, then south, then west, then north, back to the point of beginning for that lot. But they would all originally start at a common point of beginning at one intersection, pretty much. So I think that should have described that. I mean, I could use that over. Okay, we're all good. Anybody else with a question? Not seeing any. Time to move on. All right. Now it says monuments used to establish real estate boundaries. Well, there are options for people who get surveys done. You can have monuments put into the ground to mark your borders. Some people want to have little flags on sticks that are nailed into the corners of the property. So anybody driving by says, oh, that's obviously a boundary marker that shows the boundary. And if you look down the line and see another stick, you know that that's the boundary line delineated between those two temporary or man-made monuments to be put in those places. Other people will have little iron rebars sunk in the ground at the corners of their property. So all the surveyor does have to do is go out with his metal detector, find it, read the GPS coordinates, see how it translates from the point of beginning, match it up. You got a boundary description by finding out where the little metal rebars are in the corner, and then describing point of beginning to the next, and then to the next, and to the next, back to the point of beginning. So monuments can help establish real estate borders when planted at the corners of the property. All right, moving on. Then there's the rectangular survey system. Now, just for your edification, we do not use the rectangular survey system here in New Jersey, but you have to know about it anyway to pass the test. What? It's not fair. I don't care if it's fair or not. You got to learn about it. So what's the rectangular survey system all about? Also known as the government survey system. So when anything that has to do with the government, obviously, is going to be weird. Just joking, guys. Here's the thing. First of all, you have to know and understand how people used to circumnavigate the globe in order to understand what a rectangular survey system is. So we live on a three-dimensional globe. Now, whether you're a flat earther or not, it's up to you to decide, and I don't want to discuss the finer points of the earth today. But we live on a three-dimensional globe. That means there must be a three-dimensional description of property. So we use commonly accepted, very old and very trusted basis to describe real estate, and that is latitude lines. You know the lines that go around the world this way, left and right, horizontally? Those are called latitude lines. 0 degrees latitude is at the equator, right in the middle of the planet. 90 degrees north latitude, North Pole, South Pole is 90 degrees south of the equator. The northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And there are latitude lines all the way up to the North Pole. There's also the lines that go around the world from top to bottom, dispersed every so often. Those are called longitude lines. And 0 degrees longitude is at Greenwich, England. Anything going west of that line is the Western Hemisphere. Anything going east from that line is the Eastern Hemisphere. So if I understand correctly, New Jersey is somewhere in the North Hemisphere and the West Hemisphere, but that doesn't get me very far. So we now use GPS coordinates to fine-tune our description. So when you got in your car and navigated to McDonald's for lunch on some other town, you entered into an address and it says, okay, proceed in a northerly direction, so many feet, miles, whatever, and then it's turn right, whatever else, until you got to your destination. They use commonly accepted chart lines of latitude and longitude with GPS satellites fine-tuning your position according to the GPS coordinates. So if you have such a device on your phone, you can read what your GPS coordinates are. Now, for me, oops, wrong program, my mistake. I always keep a nice tool on my, on my phone called Gauges. And it measures altimeter. It's an altimeter, it's a speedometer, it's a barometer, it's an accelerometer, a magnetometer, it's a sound level check, and it's also compass and directions. So when I go to the compass and directions and read my GPS coordinates, it says I am 40 degrees, 52 minutes, 49.25 seconds north latitude. So if that's true, that's the equator, North Pole. I'm roughly just about halfway up, right? And that's about where New Jersey is, according to the equator and the North Pole, about halfway up towards that. But it also says I'm at 74 degrees, 2 minutes, 34.9 seconds west longitude. So on a map, a quarter of the way around the world would be 90 degrees. So I'm just shy of a quarter way around the world from Great Britain, or roughly 6 to 7 hours difference. 5 to 6, more like. So it's very easy then to use GPS coordinates as descriptors, and many surveys have them notated in there. However, that's a way to find myself in a two-dimensional area, latitude and longitude. But there's something else going on, because remember, I live on a three-dimensional planet. Therefore, my height from sea level, the third measure of location, must be noted as well. So here in America, we use 0 feet from sea level at New York Harbor. Where I am at right now, I have to go back to my altimeter program and let you know that I am approximately 7 feet above sea level as I sit at the top of my desk in Hackensack, New Jersey. And in fact, this is a very low-lying area. When we have very heavy rainstorms or floods and stuff, the streets around here are soaking wet and flooding. You guys who live down in the Hoboken, Bayonne, Jersey City, and areas like that, when we get those storms, you guys get wet. Your basements, your offices in your basements, and your apartments in your basements get flooded because you're literally at 2 to 3 feet above sea level there. So the altimeter reading, known as a altitude reading, is used as a property descriptor in the meets and bounds description, as well as any other description, because you have to know, especially if you're selling multi-floor condo units. What's that third description? How high are you? Where does the unit start above sea level? Well, you start at 140 feet above sea level and extends to 150 feet above sea level. That means you're roughly on the 14th floor or so. Remember, buildings don't have 13 floors because of luck and all that other stuff. But anyway, so your height from sea level, the difference, 0 feet to where your location is known as datum. And datum is used when determining altitude and altitude differences of different readings. Datum. Also, around the country, there are something called permanent benchmarks that record altitudes at certain locations. When I was a Ute, remember I was a young guy, a Ute. When I was a kid, I used to do a lot of backpacking up the Adirondack Mountains. I did 23 of the 46 high peaks. I was pretty avid. I'm not going to go back and do the other 23. I've decided that elevators are the best way to get up in altitude these days. But anyway, at the top of every mountain you crest, there's this little brass plaque. It's about this big. Sits in the granite surface at the top of the mountain with a number on it. It says U.S. Geological Survey, then has a number on it. And that number is not a year or anything like that. It's the number of feet you're at above sea level. 1592, 1420. Numbers of feet above sea level. Surveyors use that information in using their meets and bounds description as part of their meets and bounds description so that everybody knows the terrain of the property, the rise or fall over distance from one marker to another. That's why those surveyors have that silly little machine on that tripod, they're looking through, and they got their assistant standing out of distance with this pole with weird numbers and rings and stuff on it. Well, that surveyor's looking at it as a horizontal line and an even line going across distance. And where that marker is, he'll read the number on the ring to determine how much drop or rise has occurred over that distance, and we'll make a note. So from this point to the next, there's a rise of 7 feet, meaning from the front of the property, the terrain rises. And you can describe this in this geographic, in the meets and bounds description, so people can understand not only the two-dimensional, height, width, and the width and depth of the property. They can also determine where in the property the terrain is higher and where it's lower. So benchmarks are permanent markers around the United States that show recorded altitudes. Datum is the difference between sea level and the location of the marker, and is used to determine height of elevation in the description. Did anybody get so confused you lost me about 20 minutes ago? Because this is really basic science stuff you learned in high school. Whether you went to high school or not is not my concern, or paid attention. Or you smoking cigarettes out in the bleachers and you weren't paying attention. Do we need to know what's the most common in today's real estate for making? What you need to know, Kira, is in New Jersey, the most precise legal description used, and we do use it, is the meets and bounds description. That's what you have to remember. I'm not going to repeat what I said. It took me like 20 minutes to describe what I just said. Yes, you're right, Luciana. Can you give an example of a benchmark? And again, I'll do it again one more time. A permanent marker located around any place in the United States that's put there by the U.S. Geological Survey crews. The markers I was describing were at the top or crests of mountain tops that were permanent markers describing the difference from sea level to that location. So if I crested, let's say Mount Marcy, there'd be a reading, a plaque in the ground, a benchmark that said this location is 1,347 feet above sea level. That's what a benchmark is, a permanent marker recording the altitude of that marker. And it's used as a reference point and a point of beginning in some descriptions. Hoboken representing, I'm a little confused in regard to the latitude, longitude, elevation. Are you saying it's used for meets and bounds or the rectangular survey system or both? Well, it uses both. Both descriptions use it as a basis of its description. I haven't gotten into the rectangular survey system description. I'm just throwing in some background here for all meets and bounds and for rectangular survey. Datum again is the difference from sea level to your location. I didn't understand the measuring elevation. Can you please explain? Oh boy, I don't know how else to explain measuring elevation except you go to sea level at New York Harbor, it's 0. Then you go to a location, measure the number of feet you are above sea level, and that's your altitude. And if you were to record it permanently, like the U.S. Geological Survey crews did, you'd make a brass plaque, put it in the ground with that number on it so you can always reference that. So measuring elevation is a critical part of surveying because in a multi-story unit, you have to know what's the elevation of the bottom floor and the top floor, so you get a more precise legal description. So I do want to move on. I don't want to diss you guys, but again, I was thinking maybe most of this information was general knowledge you learned from high school. But again, I have to assume then a lot of people didn't pay attention in high school. Smoking cigarettes in a boys' room was more important. I'm just saying. All right, let's move on. Now the rectangular survey system, also known as the government survey system, and is based on principal meridians and baselines. Well, you know where the meridians and baselines came from? The longitude and latitude lines from the GPS coordinates. So a baseline is a latitude line, and a principal meridian line is a longitude line. You've heard of the prime meridian. That's the international date line, and 0 degrees longitude as recorded at Greenwich, England, that goes around the globe. And it's somewhere in the middle Western Pacific Ocean is the other side of that ring. So if you're on one side of it, you're on Thursday. If you go across it, you're on Friday. Or if you go the opposite way, you go back to Wednesday. So the international date line is a time travel device. No, it's not. It's just where it delineates the 24-hour separation. That's all. Now, under the rectangular survey system, they use the latitude lines as what's called a baseline. And from that and the longitude line that intersects it, they create large square territories. Now, in 1785, as soon as the United States started its Western expansion program, we picked up huge territories of land. Millions of square feet were added all of a sudden to the United States. But in so doing, we needed a way to describe those properties. So our founding fathers looked around and, they looked at towns and cities to say, what's the best way to describe territory? Well, they looked up in Boston, Massachusetts. I spent 15 years in Boston. Great town. A lot of fun up there, but cold as hell. And then they realized if you look at Boston, there's no rhyme or reason to how they laid out the streets in Boston. And if you've ever been there, you would agree it's a mess. Streets go different ways. They loop back along themselves and go different directions. So how did they figure that out? I think it was a bunch of drunk sailors trying to get back to their boats that, laid out the streets. I'm just kidding. But then they looked at Manhattan, New York City. So let me ask you this question, so please respond. If I'm standing on the corner, on the west corner of 8th Avenue and the northwest corner of 8th Avenue and 34th Street, where am I? I'm on the northwest corner of 8th Avenue where it intersects 34th Street. Where am I? You're at the point of beginning. Oh boy. Let's see, what do we got? At a diner. Well, Penn Station is where I'm at. Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. Penn Station. And down the street is the Circle in the Square, Madison Square Garden across the street. I think there's a post office across the street there too. So people find it very easy using a grid pattern to describe locations. Great, thanks for the input, guys. Penn Station, I thought was on the 8th side or west side of 8th. I could be wrong. But anyway, you know exactly where I am using a grid description. So what the U.S. rectangular survey system is nothing less than a vast area described in big squares called quadrangles. If you've ever flown across country, you know this, that you look down out of the window, all you see is like a big checkerboard, right? Yeah, that's how it's laid out in big squares. So they delineate townships by measuring 6 miles by 6 miles. Big square, 6 miles by 6 miles. And if you look on page 323, you can see the description of a township. It is 6 miles by 6 miles, and each individual square mile in the township, there are 36 of them, each individual square mile is called a section. At the bottom of the page, you now see what a section is. A 1 mile by 1 mile piece of property or description inside of a township, which is 6 miles by 6 miles or 36 square miles. Therefore, that 1 mile by 1 mile section is 1 square mile. Is anybody having any problem understanding this before I move on? Because if you can't understand simple basic squares, we got a real problem. The post office part of Penn now, okay. Anybody having a miscommunication or a bad understanding of what squares represent, what a township or what a section is? Apparently, Charles Herman, I see you've got the dialogue bar open, and so is Abdul, so I'm guessing you guys have questions, so I'll wait. So Ayana, you're confused. Okay, let me see if I can help you with a whiteboard here. If you go west of the Ohio River, and that's where the rectangular survey system starts, is at the Ohio River and goes west. If you were to look down, you would see big squares on the ground. Now, let's pretend this is a square, okay? I'm not a very good artist. There are squares all over the place delineating certain townships, which are 6 miles by 6 miles, or 36 square miles. This would be a township, 6 miles by 6 miles. Now, let's say I'm going to zoom in here on the 6 mile by 6 mile description. And inside there are 36 individual 1 square mile sections. 1 mile by 1 mile. So let's zoom in again. So here's a 1 mile by 1 mile section. 1 mile by 1 mile. So literally we went from big bunch of townships to 1 township to 1 section, which is 1 mile by 1 mile. And they're all square. Rectangulars or quadrilaterals, they're not specifically squares. It's just a term they use, Gary. But anyway, so now we understand how to describe property in a rectangular survey system. First of all, you would have to say what section in a specific township you're located in. We're in the town of Smallville, USA, and I'm in section 16. Well, if we look at our book on page 323 at a township, section 16, which is highlighted, by the way, because normally that's where schools, municipal offices, things like that are located, centrally located. Then you could see from a visual description exactly where I am in that township, in that section, 1 mile by 1 mile. But then below that, it blows up that section. Then I'd have to describe where I was in that section. So I'd say I'm in the northwest corner, or excuse me, the northwest half of the northwest quarter of the section. So northwest. So I have that top left corner. So let's say we divide this in quarters. And the first top half left corner says, well, the northwest northwest half of the northwest quarter, this is where I live. That's my farm. Come and visit me. Pick some eggs, plow some fields for me. I'd really appreciate it. But again, it's just another way to describe property that we do not use in New Jersey, but you need to know about it for your exam. And then you can forget all about it, believe me, because we don't use it here. If you're from other areas of the country, you pretty much know that this works. And let's say you're in Seattle. Well, there's a northwest quarter of Seattle, a northeast quarter of Seattle. There's a southwest quarter of Seattle and a southeast quarter of Seattle. Knowing that, it's very easy then using this rectangular system to see and describe where you're at, where the property is. So, once again, the rectangular survey system, the government survey system, is not used in New Jersey, but it is how we describe land out west of the United States, moving from the Ohio River, moving west. Now, I don't want to go Q&A here, guys. This is just stuff you have to remember to pass the test. Other than that, you can forget all about it after you pass the test. But there is a couple things you have to remember. Number one, township 6 miles by 6 miles. A section is 1 mile by 1 mile. And in a 1 mile by 1 mile section, another whiteboard demonstration. Oops, geez, sorry. I hate using a mouse as a writing device. I got to get a pen or something that works better. Let's say this is a square. Let's just say it's a square, please. It's 1 mile by 1 mile. In 1 square mile, there are 640 acres. This is what you do need to remember. In 1 square mile section, there are 640 acres. And believe me when I tell you guys, I've heard from several students who have taken the state exam. Now, the state exam is composed of about 125 questions, of which they draw those questions from a good 5,000 to 6,000 question pool. And you can get any combination of questions, so every test is different from the other. One of the questions that was asked comes up this way. If a 1 mile by 1 square mile, it starts this way. If there are 640 acres in 1 square mile, then how many acres are in 1/2 square mile? What would you say would be the answer? If 640 acres are in 1 square mile, then how many acres are in 1/2 a squared mile? 320, right? But wait a minute. Wait a minute. That may not be right. David's got the idea. He's right. A 1/2 square mile means 1/2 by 1/2. In other words, it's 1/4 of the amount in 160. So one of the questions is, if there are 640 acres in 1 square mile, then how many acres in 1/2 squared mile? 1/2 of a squared mile is 1/2 by 1/2, or 160 acres. The other question I've heard students say, because it could be confusing, is if there are 640 acres in 1 square mile, then how many acres are in 1/2 of a squared mile? Then it would be 320, because you're talking about 1/2 of the squared mile. It comes down to this: which question you get may indicate which answer you better supply, because they're both different, with the change of maybe 1 or 2 words in the entire question. And the question is, once again, if there are 640 acres in 1 square mile, then how many acres are in 1/2 of a squared mile? Or then the other one is, if there's 640 acres in 1 square mile, then how many acres are in 1/2 of a squared mile? And there is a big difference. One's 160, one's 320. So again, just a hint, that may be present on your test, and you may never get that question. It's just that if you do, I warned you, be prepared, that's all. So in other words, read the questions and understand it first before you answer. Now, another number you have to, in fact, there's 2 more numbers you have to remember. How many feet are in 1 mile? Well, if you look at a section on the bottom of page 323, and you know it to be 1 mile by 1 mile, then on the top number of the figure 19.3, it says it's 5,280 feet is 1 mile. So number 1, remember that 1 mile contains 5,280 feet. That's a very important number to remember. The other one is, how many square feet are there in 1 acre? Oh, I don't know. Well, if you have the hardcover textbook inside the front flap on the top left quarter, oh, look, area calculations. 1 acre equals 43,560 square feet. So you need to remember that 1 acre contains 43,560 squared feet. And you better memorize that number, because people are going to ask you, how big is the lot? How many square feet is the lot? So if you know if it's a 1/2 acre, then divide 43,560 by 2, and you can tell them. Or if the acre description's in feet, you can tell them that's a percentage of an acre, or that's 3.2 acres by just calculating. Guys, you do need to know this for your real estate career. How many square feet are in 1 acre? There's another reason I say this. In my area of expertise up here in the northwest, well, the northeast corner of New Jersey, There were several builders back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s that built lots using what is known as a builder's acre. Now, if I were to ask you to square out 43,560 square feet, you'd have to come up with 207.654321000754, and it goes on for quite a while, each side of the lot, which is impossible to do when you're building on big land. So what builders typically did, they said, okay, builder's acres, 200 feet by 200 feet, or roughly 40,000 square feet, which is close enough to an acre to say, hey, it's a builder's acre. 200 by 200 is so much easier to lay out than 207.543217650001, whatever. Ridiculous. So a builder's acre is going to be 40,000 square feet. You may see that in land descriptions, and now you know that means roughly 0.97 of an acre. That's easy to do. All right, before I go on, obviously I'm going to ask, are there any questions? And I know you're going to have a bunch, so go ahead. Is this why so many states have straight lines as boundaries? Yes, it is, Michael. There's an interesting show, by the way, on, I don't know if it's History Channel or Science Channel. It's called How the States Got Their Shapes. And in many times it's because rivers, natural resource locations, and things like that. But then many of them do carry along with it the meridians and the baseline descriptions. Might as well be derivatives on the test. Yeah, right. The last part you said, can you repeat? Okay, Ayana, real quick. Builder's acre is 40,000 square feet, correct, but it's still not a true acre. It's just what we call a builder's acre. So a builder would come along, instead of saying measure out precise distances to figure out an acre, they just said 200 feet by 200 feet is close enough to an acre that will just delineate the properties that way. 40,000 square feet, 0.97 of an acre. Is it close enough so that builder said, it's a builder's acre, close enough to an acre, that's a builder's acre, 40,000 square feet. All right, I hope I answered the questions. I don't see any more, so let's proceed. Then there's the recorded plat of subdivision. Yesterday, we talked about subdivision law and regulation. Whenever a subdivider comes into a town and subdivides land, he has to record that new land with the tax department. And the tax department, along with that subdivider, will delineate which block numbers will be used and what lot numbers in each block will be used for each lot description. Now, you may get a tax bill where you live. On it will have your street address along with your current lot number and what block number is assigned to your property as well. So if you turn your book to page 324, there's a plat of survey, figure 19.4, that shows what block is where and which numbers or lot numbers are assigned in which block. So if I said known lots 7, 8, 9, and 10 in block 3 on a certain map, then which lots am I in? Well, first of all, I have to find block number 3. Okay, got it. Then go to lots number 7, 8, and 9. So where are they? Oh, 7, 8, and 9 are right in the middle, South of Dells Road, left of the block 3 label. And which one? And 10 was it? And 10, so that's the top left corner in that area. So I know exactly which lots I'm talking about. So using block and lot numbers are a very easy description when referencing the map, or they call it a plat, of the subdivision to see where the property is located. And when using lot and block numbers, it's always associated with a street address. Now, when we talk about condos and co-ops and things like that, that's why datum is important to understand, because elevation will determine the location of the property. So understand datum is very important to use in your not only plat of subdivision, but your your rectangular survey system, as well as the meets and bounds description. Before I finish up this section, were there any follow-up questions? Because we're going to go right into deeds. It's the whole easy, Luciana, take a chill pill. You don't want to fight anybody. All right. I know it is. I'm kidding. So data is important. All three, yes. And Sean Leach, you had a question. So data, okay. No chill pills, only beer. All right. All right, let me moderate the conversation and move on. So we talked about using a survey. Who makes surveys? A licensed surveyor must be the one who prepares a survey. Sure, a survey shows the location, dimensions of a parcel of property. Location, size, and buildings are usually put on the survey as well. So when looking at a survey of a property, you know where the boundaries are and where the buildings are and maybe other important things. On surveys, surveyors sometimes, and especially in my area, have to record where the septic location is on a property. So that if I need someone to come and pump my septic out or repair it or replace it, they know exactly where it is by looking on the survey. They know where the house is because it's delineated on the survey. They know the borderlines are, they know the septic is. If I have any major structures on the property, they'd probably also want to include that. So I have an in-ground pool. They have to locate that in the survey as well. Maybe some major trees that would be permanent to a lot, they locate and things like that as well. Driveways, walkways, whatever. But a survey is the legal description of the property showing locations, dimensions of the property and things on it. Surveys are used when conveying property to another party. It's also used when financing or refinancing, or just in case you need a legal description of the property, you can use your survey. And the meets and bounds description, which we use here in New Jersey, is the most precise description of property that we know of. All right. Using elevations, we talked about that. Datum, the difference between sea level and the location of the item is known as datum, the difference. And benchmarks, as we said, were permanent locations around the US for reference points. All right, so we finished up legal descriptions. Now we've got to move on to deeds. So, does anybody need to ask a question before I move on to deeds? Can I go back to 9 for 1 second? Measuring elevation, guys, it's right from your book, page 325. It's all right there in the book. Is a new survey made every time a house is sold, or you use the previous one? You could use the previous one, but I'm going to caution you. Depending on how old that survey is, it may not be accurate. Things happen in a very quick period of time that could indicate a neighbor has encroached into your property. Or someone put a fence up and it's just slightly over the property line. That's not good either. So it's always recommended when buying property, unless the survey is older than 7 years, to get a brand new one done. Property owners can also use surveys to determine if a neighbor's fence is example on the property. Correct. Ayana, anybody else with a question? Was there any other questions before I move on? My Wi-Fi kept going in and out and I missed it, sorry. Okay, well, you can read the chapter. You'll catch up, no problem. So let's move on. All right, now, deeds. I'm sorry, Mary Vitas, did you have a question? Let me open it up for you. Mary? Guess not, okay. Deeds. Now, you do not get a title with your real estate investment. A title is something you get when you buy a car or an ATV or a motorcycle or something like that. You get a title, registered with the Motor Vehicle Commission, right? And it's proof of ownership. You do not get a title specifically when you buy real estate. What you do get, however, is a deed. And a deed is an instrument, and it must be in writing, that conveys title rights from one party to another. So when you buy real estate, the seller, known as the grantor, gives you a deed or conveys title rights through a piece of property known as a deed. And you receive the deed as proof of the transfer of the title rights to you and what conditions of ownership you must abide by. We're going to get into all those conditions in a few minutes, but certainly, first of all, the deed must be in writing. We cannot use oral agreements to transfer property unless it is accompanied by a deed. The deed, the written document, is proof of the transfer of title rights to the property from the grantor to the grantee, the person receiving the property. Without a deed, there is no transfer of property. It's that simple. Hey, I'm going to sell you my property. Give me some money and it's yours. Well, you need a deed to convey that right of ownership to the new person. Without it, you just took their money and they got nothing in return because you still own the property if a deed wasn't conveyed. So understand, guys, a deed must be in writing for the transfer of ownership to take place. So who are the parties to the deed? I said it was a grantor, the person who sells, gives, dedicates, wills, transfers, whatever you want to use as a term, to another party known as the grantee, the person that receives the property. And a deed, by law, must be signed by the grantor as proof of conveyance. And there's different types of deeds. There's full covenant and warranty deeds, which you can no longer get in the United States. You could get them when we were British colonies back in the 16 and 1700s. When Britain ruled the U.S. as a colony, property was conveyed with a full covenant warranty deed because the King of England granted the loyalists ownership of property. If you were a colonist, there's a good chance the king could take your property away without your knowledge or permission, and you had to live with that fact. But if you were a loyalist to the King of England, King George, well, by golly, he would reward you with land grants, ownerships of large tracts of land. So, Kira McGuire, you are a loyalist to the king during the rule of 1750. And King Charles said to you, Kira, you've been a faithful servant, always loyal to the king. I grant you 50,000 acres of property in western New Jersey. Kira's all happy because now she owns 50,000 acres of prime farmland and all kinds of resources. She received from the King of England a full covenant and warranty deed that protect her, Kira, against any and all comers under any and all circumstances. In other words, the King of England, when conveying ownership to a loyalist, gave them full covenant warranty, meaning if there's any question from anybody questioning your ownership of land, you tell them the King of England gave you this property. And you can prove it with a full covenant warranty deed signed by me, the King of England. I'll put my seal on it. If they still question it, the full force of the British Empire is here to back you up. So anybody who claims an interest in your property will be convinced that it would be a good idea to get off the property because the King of England will send his troops and they may be killed as a result. Well, certainly you didn't want to give the King of England a hard time, so nobody trespassed on your property and nobody tried to claim your ownership. But if they did, the King of England would send his troops over and get them off the land and tell them, scoot, you're not allowed to live here or use this property. So he stood behind it from today, the day he grants you that property, until eternity itself ended. Wow, that's some power of ownership, right? So if anybody comes to me and says, you took my land, I'm going to say the King of England told me it's mine, and they'll send the troops and kill you if you don't agree, and that's exactly the truth. And that extended from that period of time, and if the King of England still owned the colonies in the U.S., it would still be in full force and effect. But poor old Charles got kicked out of the good old US of A in 1776, and after a brief skirmish with the British Empire, we won our independence, and no new full covenant warranty deeds could ever be created again. Because no one has guaranteed rights of ownerships and protections against anything and everything forever and ever. That's impossible to achieve, not in a free society. But today, we do get bargain and sale deeds with covenants against grantors acts, which gives and offers the most protection of any deed out there on the market today, except for a full covenant warranty deed. You may see a test question that says, what deed gives the best and most protection under all circumstances? Well, that would theoretically be the full covenant warranty deed, and that would be the answer you would choose. However, today you can't get a full warranty covenant deed. You get what is known as a special warranty deed. So today you're going to get a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors acts, which means the seller is selling property and protects the buyer, the grantee, against anything that the seller did to the property while they owned it. The seller received the same type of bargain sale deed with covenant against grantors from the previous owner to protect that guy against anything the previous owner did to the property, and so on and so on and so on. And after a good 60, 70 years, there pretty much is no claims against the property, or so, or you would think. But again, it's a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors act, also known as a special warranty deed. Then there's the bargain and sale deed with no covenants. And a bargain and sale deed is similar to what I would term as a sheriff's deed. When selling a property at auction, the sheriff gives a buyer a sheriff's deed. Sometimes they give it a bargain and sale deed with no covenants. Either way, it's the same protection. And what it says is, you own the property. There's no protections against anything anybody did to the property. So you're now in full control, and whatever issues are on the property are your problem. That's what a bargain and sale deed does. It grants you ownership, but any issues with the property also are now yours as the owner of the property. That's not very desirable. You'd rather have a bargain and sale deed with covenant against grantors act to protect you against what the previous owner did to the property, but not so much with a bargain and sale deed, because there are no covenants against grantors acts. There's also quitclaim deeds, which are technically like correction deeds. Quitclaim deeds can be used in several instances. Say you get married and want to add a spouse's name to your deed, you can use a quitclaim deed to do that. Or you get divorced and want to remove a name from the ownership records of a property, you can use a quitclaim deed to do that as well. Quitclaim deeds can be used in what we call suits to quiet title, and we'll talk about that later, when ownership of property may be contingent upon solving a problem from the past. Quitclaim deeds can be used in suits for partition. Last week when we talked about different types of ownership, joint tenants can separate ownership interests with a suit for partition using a quitclaim deed. There's many reasons why a quitclaim deed can be used. Transfer of property from family member to family member, you can use a quitclaim deed. But the problem with a quitclaim deed is that it only transfers the interest that the owner truly has. So if I transfer my property to my daughter with a quitclaim deed, she can trust that I actually own the property and have the right to convey it to her, because I'm her father and she would always, trust me, hopefully. So a quitclaim deed can transfer property between family members without issues. However, what if I'm an unscrupulous person? And there was such a group of people about 15 years ago here in New Jersey using quitclaim deeds as a way to rip off unsuspecting buyers. A quitclaim deed only transfers the interest that the person actually has in property. So if I'm your dad or your parent or something and I transfer property using a quitclaim deed, you can trust that I'm doing the right thing and that it's valid. But what if I'm unscrupulous? Let's say I go down to the county tax records and look up property records. And by the way, in New Jersey, all our records are public records. Anybody can look at those records. So they go in and look. And they notice on my property that I'm the owner, et cetera, et cetera. And they look at how my signature is. And then they go down to a store and buy a quitclaim deed. And up until just a few years ago, all hardware stores and things like that included quitclaim deeds in those, for sale by owner packs you can buy. The problem is when using a quitclaim deed, it's only transferring what is truly in the interest of the owner to sell. Therefore, if I'm seeing who owns if someone goes down and looks at my signature, they could forge my signature on a quitclaim deed, sell it to an unsuspecting buyer who would pay for that deed. The seller then would give the deed of ownership when that person tried to move into my house and said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And of course, I'd have my double barrel loaded with plenty of good shot. And I say, "You need to turn around and get out of my house and move out right now." And they say, "Oh, but it's my house." I'm saying, no, it isn't. They just got ripped off because the deed they just got, the quitclaim deed, only gave the interest that guy looked like or legally had, which he had no legal interest in property. Therefore, in that instance, the quitclaim deed is null and void, and that guy's got to get out now. So understand, guys, a quitclaim deed, if not used properly, can lead to ripping people off. So we're going to explain more about this as we go on, but is there any basic questions, first of all, about different types of deeds and what they do? And we're going to go well into detail more about this, so don't worry. So I can have a bargain of sale deed with covenants against grantors acts, and then my new husband is on the house as a quitclaim. You can add his name with a quitclaim deed that would amend your existing your existing deed, correct? Are quitclaim deeds still sold in stores anywhere? I'm sure you can find a place to get one. Ritz got kicked out. So warranty deeds are not used today. No, there are no such thing as full covenant and warranty deeds anymore. Unless, of course, you're a British subject. How does bargain and sale differ from quitclaim? Bargain and sale actually transfers ownership. Quitclaim only transfers what is truly in ownership. And if I don't truly own the land and use a quitclaim deed, then I'm ripping you off. If I don't own the land under bargain sale, then it means nothing. But it's still a valid transfer of property, so you would have to be the owner to use a bargain sale deed. I'm sorry, Sean, for the 6 mile by 6 mile. That's because you're asking something about the previous lesson we were talking about. But let's see, for a 6 mile by 6 mile being a township, what was a 1 mile, 1 mile? I'm sorry, Sean. Let me refer you to page 323, in which we said several times what that was. So please just refer to your book. That's all. Is there any other questions before we move on? Don't quitclaim deeds only apply to primary residence? No, as I said, Sherry, you can use them in many, many different applications. Your attorney is most likely the one to use quitclaim deeds for different legal processes. Anybody else with a question before I moved on? I see a couple people typing, so I will wait. My lender has restrictions with the quitclaim deed on investment property and should, Sherry, they would probably want to insist that you got a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors act, or if you're selling it, to convey property with a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors act. unless you're getting it from a family member, then you can trust them to convey their actual interest. But again, I can see where the lender would have a problem with a quitclaim deed. Excuse me. Okay, was there any other questions? I see people online with their dialogue bars open, but I'm not seeing any additional questions. And that would be Angela, Kieran. Okay, there's how is the type of deed determined? At what point in the sale? We'll get to that in a few minutes, Elizabeth. That test question about the most protected type of deed. Why not get rid of a full covenant if it doesn't exist anymore? We're still talking about it, Kieran, and you don't get one. We're just talking about it as an example of a deed that gives the most protection. Well, you don't get it anymore. We're just talking about it. When one is going to sell a house, the person house signed. Well, I'm sorry. Quitclaim can claim the house. Let me understand that again, Yvonne. Hold on. When one is going to sell a house, the person, I guess that's who signs the quitclaim deed, can claim the house? I'm sorry, I'm not really understanding what you're asking, Yvonne. Why would a family member or anyone use it? Guys, we're going into the area of the extreme again. Guys, I'm going to just moderate the conversation. The what ifs, the maybes, under what conditions, all irrelevant to getting a real estate license. If you want to have, hypothetical scenario situations and discuss about that, let's go out for beers after school and we'll talk about it. But right now, what you have to understand is there's something called a full and covenant and warranty deed, which no longer exists. Bargain and sale deed with covenant against grantors, which offers the most protection of any deed. A bargain and sale deed, which offers very little protections, and a quitclaim deed that may or may not actually transfer ownership, depends on the grantor's actual interest in the property. Other than that, all these other questions have no bearing on learning to get the information to pass your exam. I understand your interest, believe me, I do. And again, if we had time, we could have theoretical discussions and things like that all day long. But as far as class goes, all you need to know is that there are different types of deeds. That's it. So, was there any other questions before I'm ready to move on? So, Kieran, haven't even gotten to the covenants yet. So when I do, I will explain those. Does anyone in the U.S. still have full covenant deed? No, not that I know of. Martini on me. Anyone else? Angela, I see your topping, so I'll hold on. Piece of banana fell on my keyboard. That's a good one. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's moderate the conversation and move on. So thanks for reminding us, Jose. You don't have to, but I think I've got a fair enough grip on the situation. So once again, there is no full covenant warranty deeds available to U.S. citizens from anybody selling property in the U.S. because who's going to warranty protections forever? No one. You will get a bargain sale deed with covenant against grantors as the best protection. Now, that warranty deed we spoke of had certain covenants that the King of England would convey with ownership. He would convey the covenant of season to the owner of that property. What's that? What do you get, salt and pepper? A couple of gallons of, garlic juice or something? Well, no. Season is an old English concept. In fact, many of the terms we use in real estate and the legal system come from the old British law. The covenant of a season was where a person was granted ownership, and a process would be a person would go out into the land that they were given, pull up a clump of earth, hold it up and say, I have seized the land. Meaning it is mine, I control it, I can do with it what I wish. You can't get the full covenant of season, you get a modified one, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes today. But that would be the example of a covenant of season. Owning the property, it's mine, I can do with it what I wish. The covenants against encumbrances says that if there's any type of encumbrance, whether it be a lien, a easement, a license, an encroachment, anything like that against the property, the King of England with a word could dismiss that encumbrance against the property, because he's the King of England, and whoever had that right of lien, easement, license, whatever it was, has to say, okay, I no longer have that right, because the King of England is backing it up. They also conveyed with that a covenant of quiet enjoyment. So if anybody does question the ownership, the King of England will do anything to supply paperwork to support your ownership rights. And if it's a covenant of further assurance, from now until forever. So the covenant of warranty forever said, under all circumstances, if any one of these things happen against you, the King of England will protect you against them forever. So you can now see why you don't get a warranty deed, a full warranty deed, because you can't get those protections anymore. So let's, however, understand what a bargain and sale deed is with covenants against Grantors Act, they call it, the Covenants Against Grantors Act, which means the grantor is willing to warrant about the time they own the property. So whatever the grantor who owns the property did to the property while they owned it, they'll fix, repair, replace, pay off, do whatever it was to fix that, so that when they convey ownership to you, you're not getting any charges or liens filed against you, or any encumbrances undisclosed to you that you would agree to. So it states that they have done nothing to encumber the property in that period of time they have owned it. If they did, they'll take care of it. But it says nothing about previous owners. Whatever the previous owners did to the property is how that seller, the grantor, took control of the property, which is now being passed on to you. So it's imperative that buyers read and understand a deed of conveyance to know what it is exactly they're getting and what they're going to be protected against using a bargain and sale deed with Covenants Against Grantors Act. This is also known as a special warranty deed. It's special. Woohoo! Getting a special deed, baby. Then there's a bargain and sale deed which says you own the property and there's no covenants of protections granted you. Whatever comes with the property is your problem. No one's protecting you against anything previous owners did to the property. You're just getting the property, and whatever you get, and you don't get upset. So the grantee, the person receiving the property, has very little recourse if there are defects that appear in ownership. It's their now responsibility to abide by or try to go after and try to fix. Bargain and sale deeds are often used in foreclosures and tax sales. Again, another term I say is sometimes they use what is known as a sheriff's deed, which is the same as a bargain and sale deeds. No covenants against grantors or anything. Whatever you get, you get. And if there's problems with it, it's your own problem. In other words, caveat emptor, a Latin phrase meaning let the buyer beware. So if a buyer who buys property has title problems, then it's the buyer's fault. Because the buyer is responsible to research, title search the property they're buying and understand the terms and conditions under which they're buying it. All right, moving on. Quitclaim deed provides the least protection of any deed. There are no covenants, no warranties. It does not even imply that the grantor holds title, but will only transfer ownership of whatever the grantor claims is his property. So again, it can be used for family members to transfer properties because you can trust them. Often used to transfer during divorce or clear a cloud from the title or add a name or subtract a name, suit for partition, etc. Technical deed makes changes to a situation. But again, it's only as good as the person signing the deed. So okay, before I go into the validity of a deed, was there any follow-up questions to those different types of deeds before we move on? Hopefully nobody's dropping any more bananas. So bargain sale is as is. Correct, Gary. Yes. You get what you get. Unless you did your research and know about stuff, whatever comes with it is your responsibility now. With this clear a cloud. Clear a cloud. We're going to talk about that in the next chapter. So hold on to your question. I will get to it. I promise. Why does it matter what kind of deed you have? You sold the property? Yes, but under what conditions, Mindy? Do you want to buy a piece of property encumbered with $150,000 worth of debt that you now acquire because the seller didn't clear it? Probably not. Do you want to buy a piece of property where the seller puts into the deed certain restrictions that you don't like? Probably not. So it varies. So it matters quite a bit what kind of deed you get. Quick claim is more like, this is what I might have, wink, wink, it's your risk. Well, nudge, nudge, yeah. Does that mean when a house is on the market for as is that the deed? No, 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 it does not mean that. It just means that what you see is what you're getting. Do your own title search, and if there's problems, I'll protect you against anything I did. You're probably much going to get an as is, but you're going to get it bargain sale covenants against grantors. But the physical condition is what they're typically talking about. Hey, there's no stove. What? And you're buying it as is. With the furnace doesn't work, stove doesn't work, plumbing shot, needs all new electrical wiring, you're buying it as is. That means you buy as is, but it doesn't have anything to do with the deed. What types of deeds are most accepted today? Bargain sale deeds with covenants against grantors act, Robert. So if you buy it for one type of deed, then you sell it for another type of, no, you'd probably use a bargain sale deed with covenant against grantors act to buy it, and you probably use the same deed to sell it. But you have to create your own deed because it's a new owner. Don't they check that there's any types of liens on the house before you buy? You check on it by having a title search done. If you don't do a title search, then whatever you get, you get. So when you say who's they, who don't they check? Did you hire a title search company to do your investigation? If not, whatever comes with it, you get, because you have a responsibility to check. So if you get problems, let the buyer beware. If you buy into title problems, it's the buyer's fault. They're supposed to do their research. If they don't, then they get what they get. Apparently, there's a couple more questions, so I will wait. Or not. Rachel, did you have a question? I see your dialogue mark up. Maybe not. Okay. I tell you what, for our discussion, we might as well start this requirement of valid deed after a coffee break. So it's right now 10:30-ish. Time for a coffee break. Take a half hour. At 11 o'clock, we'll rejoin, and we'll start talking about requirements for a valid deed. I'll leave the dialogue bar open, and I will rejoin you at 11. All right, folks, it's 11 o'clock and it's time to get started again. So, let me, hold on. When you buy a house, the lender does that for you. Okay. Okay, let's move on. We're going to moderate the conversation and we got to move on. So, requirements for a valid conveyance of real property. Well, number one, a deed must have a grantor, the person giving the property or selling the property. The grantor must have a legal capacity to execute or sign the deed. Legal capacity meaning they have all the rights and ownership interest of a property owner, that they are of sound mind and have the ability to transfer their property to another. The grantee is the person who's receiving the property, the buyer, in effect. Consideration must be named, and how much that is depends on what the sales price of the property is. The buyer is giving a value to the seller to buy the property. So the value is the consideration. How much money? There must be a granting clause in a deed. Words of conveyance. I sell, I vend, I dedicate, I gift, I will, I devise property to another. The words of conveyance, someone asked before, it doesn't matter what kind of deed or whatever, what determines what kind of deed you get. The words of conveyance, the granting clause, will sometimes determine the type of deed to be used. So if I'm selling my property, chances are I'm most likely using a bargain and sale deed with Covenants Against Grantors Act to convey the property ownership. If I'm gifting the property, I could use a quitclaim deed. If I'm dedicating, doesn't really matter because it's going to a public entity anyway. So the granting clause, the words of conveyance, may dictate what type of deed is to be used. Then there's the habendum clause. Now, just remember, under a full warranty deed, that you had the covenant of season. I control the land. It is mine to do with what I wish. The habendum clause is the modern day covenant of season. The habendum clause is also known as the wedding vow clause because the words to have and to hold are used in the habendum clause. So by granting the property to a person to have and to hold for their interest during the period of time which they own, it means it's theirs. They can do it what they wish. So the habendum clause is the modern day covenant of season, if you will. Then there must be a description of the real estate, and deeds must contain the most precise description, which is the meets and bounds description here in New Jersey. Also, in the deed of conveyance must be listed any and all exceptions and reservations affecting the title. What are exceptions and reservations? So, did you know that the deed comes with the private restriction that you can never build in the back 2 feet of the property along the entire border? No, I didn't know that. How come? Because there's a easement granted to the neighbor to use that property. Therefore, that's an exception of complete and total ownership. I may have also put in the deed a reservation for my own right by creating an easement for myself. Like what? So let's say I'm selling a house on Lake Apatcon, and the buyer buys it full well knowing that the deed says that I, the seller, reserve the right to come and use the boat dock every other weekend between Memorial Day and Labor Day of every calendar year. If they agree to that, then the deed lists that as a reservation for me, the previous owner, to come back and use that under a right of easement. Therefore, they must honor that if they agree to buy the property. Any exceptions would be easements, restrictives, covenants made with other neighbors, licenses granted, or things like that. Then, Acknowledgement is not required on a deed, but is required if the deed is to be recorded. And I'm going to go into that in a minute, so hang on to your question. For a deed of conveyance to be valid, it must also have a delivery and acceptance. Now, understand, delivery and acceptance is a physical act. One person delivers the deed, another person takes the deed, accepts it. The point under when a deed is delivered and acceptance is the moment that title ownership to property changes ownership. So at a closing, symbolically, we have a transfer of ownership when the seller, after receiving the check from the buyer, hands over the keys to the house to the buyer. Symbolically, that may represent a delivery and acceptance. However, for a delivery and acceptance to actually take place, a deed of conveyance must be given from the seller to the buyer at the closing. And at that moment, when the deed is delivered and then accepted by the buyer, that's when property ownership transfer. Not before, not after. Do I have to be present at closing to accept the deed? No. Your attorney can close your transaction and work for you through power of attorney and do that for you. So it's not that you have to physically accept it. So long as there is delivery and acceptance, then it must occur. But what if there's no real, well, hang on a second. Let's think about this for a minute. So here's a scenario. I want you to think about this. I'm up at the cabin up in the Adirondacks, and my grandson is with me, and I say to my grandson, you see this cabin and all this land? I'm going to give it to you. So one day when you become 18, you own this property. And I'm going to write out a deed right now. It says everything about you owning property. So listen, I'm going to put it in my strong box. I'm going to put it under the bed up at the cabin. So when you hear that I'm dead, you come up here, you get that deed, and the property's yours. So we do all that. 10 years later, I pass away. My grandson then is old enough to go up to the cabin, pulls that deed out. He's the rightful owner of the property now. But wait a minute. No, he's not, because there was never a physical delivery and acceptance of the deed from party to party. Unfortunately, I should have given him the deed to take effect when he reaches his 18th birthday, when I made the deal with him. By placing in a strong box and then me dying, there was never a chance for me to deliver the deed. And because he never accepted it physically from me, there was never a delivery and acceptance. So unfortunately, my grandson doesn't get the property. I could have done it better, but in this case, I messed up. So there has to be a delivery and acceptance of the deed from grantor to grantee for the purchase and transfer of rights to be valid. Deeds don't have to have dates on them. There's no requirement to have a date on a deed. Now, getting back to acknowledgement for a second. Understand that an acknowledgement is not proof of ownership, proof of anything. All it is proof that a signature is genuine. So when the buyer signs the deed, he needs to have a witness, like a notary public, an attorney, who can attest to the declaration that that person is the bona fide buyer that signed the deed, and then they would have to witness it with a signature. If you're a notary, you have to use your jurat and all that other good stuff. The little, stamp and your sign and your signature and the stamp and the impression you make. So that must be, and that then and only then, after an acknowledgement has been signed and witnessed, could the document then be recorded into the public record. So no documents can be accepted into public records unless it has been acknowledged. In other words, you signed a statement that the terms and conditions I agreed to, signed the buyer. Then the witness would have signed that, then you can record the document. So my question to you is, did you agree to the latest update on your Apple software? Did you know that if you sign that document, then Apple has the right to do anything they want pretty much with your phone and you can't prevent them? Did you know that phones, laptops, tablets, unless specifically programmed not to, users on the other end of your apps can access your video and audio components and listen and watch what you do? Did you agree to those terms and conditions in your Apple update? Of course not, because you never read them. However, you signed saying yes, so you accepted the terms and conditions. Yuck. But in a document of a deed of conveyance, that signature must then be attested to by a witness to ensure that it's the correct person accepting the deed. Then it makes it eligible for recording. So these are the requirements for a valid deed of conveyance. Specifically, any questions before I move on? Dante, you have a question. If someone dies and leaves you the deed to a house in their will, does the attorney act as a deliverer? So, well, first of all, the will itself is the deed of conveyance, believe it or not. The attorney would just write up, if he wanted to, a quitclaim deed and convey ownership. So long as it's done between the attorney and the inheritor, no problem, because the attorney is the representative of that person. In the case of the grandfather and the grandson, how would the grandson get the property then? If I had conveyed it to him, delivered it, and accepted before I died. So will supersedes when below 18. Supersedes what? I'm sorry, Jitendra, what does a will supersede? What happens if there are two grantees and one dies and the second grantee will be the owner? Again, you're going off into the what ifs, guys. Let's not go there. I don't want to answer those questions because it's not pertinent to your passing an exam. In the case of a grandfather and grandson, even if he gave him the deed, delivery acceptance, there was no acknowledgement of signature. It's still okay because the deed is still valid, even if it's not recorded. And some people choose not to record their documents. It doesn't make the deed invalid because it's not recorded. It's still valid. Means if deed is not there, I'm going to have to go back to your first question to find out what you're talking about. So will supersedes when below 18, meaning if deed is not there, will is needed for under 18. No, it doesn't have to be put in a will. You could put it in a trust. You could give it to someone else with the direction that it then be conveyed to you. So there's many different ways to get around it. It doesn't have to be one way. Does the delivery acceptance have to happen in front of someone, or is it again, it's so long as it's delivery acceptance, that's valid. Does there have to be witnesses? You would always like to have one, but no, you don't have to have one. So who gets the property if there is no backup? Yeah, probate court then determines. So what was Sherry's question? The case of grandfather, grandson, if he gave him the deed, delivery, so okay, I did answer that. How does the grandson get the property if he only verbalizes to him? Again, he doesn't. He doesn't. There has to be a delivery acceptance of the deed. Why doesn't the deed have to be required? I don't know, but that's the law. So long as you know what the law is, you'll pass an exam. Why? Doesn't matter why. That there is, that exists, that's all you got to know. If the person is notary, can he self-notarize? I don't know. You have to talk to a notary about that. I don't think he could, but I don't know. All right, let's move on, guys. And guys, please, again, why people do things or the motivation or reasoning behind things is none of our concern. All we have to know is that this is a deed. This is the conditions of a valid conveyance. Other than that, everything else you want to talk about is not pertinent to the exam. Don't fill your head with information that has no effect on your ability to pass a test. Only fill your head with stuff that helps you pass a test. Then after you pass your test, then you can sit down and discuss what ifs and wherewithals and motivation and reasons and stuff. Then it's fine. But to pass the test, guys, let's just stick to the facts, as it were. What happens if there's corporate deeds and transferring ownership of corporately owned property? Well, That's a very good question. And the fact is, when real estate is being conveyed, whether bought or sold by corporations, then the deed first must be accompanied by a corporate resolution authorizing the company to sell or buy property. Now, as a councilman in my town, I was a councilman for 6 years back some time ago. I chose not to rerun. I can't function at the speed of government. I just can't. I have to function at the speed of business, which is completely different than government. But anyway, here's the thing. We authorized the town to do certain things before we could do it. When we went to redo our DPW building, before we could spend a penny, before we could talk to architects and designers and contractors, I mean, before we did anything, we first had to have a corporate resolution, a town resolution, authorizing the town to replace the DPW building. Then and only then could we start talking to people about cost, design, timeframes, and everything else. Just like that, a corporation, when selling or buying property, must have from the board of directors a resolution authorizing them to buy or sell property. Now, understand, guys, in a corporate situation, the board of directors pretty much are the say-sowers of the business of the corporation. However, if a corporation is going to be buying or selling property that represents a very large investment, it generally requires all of the shareholders to vote on it, and then the board of directors will determine what to do. So understand, guys, if you're going to be working for the corporate interest out there as a realtor, you need, first of all, a corporate resolution authorizing them to buy or sell. And then if it's a very, very big one, make sure that board of directors has their shareholders vote if they need to before the resolution is justified. So again, corporate resolutions, very important in getting, and it's got to be signed by the board of directors or authorizing agents before you can do your job. So in effect, that was the chapter on land description and deeds. Was there any follow-up questions before I pull up the review questions for the chapter? Not seeing any. Then let me go ahead and pull up the review questions for this chapter, and we will move on. This is chapter 19, which is right here. There you go. Okay, so question number 1. A person legally authorized to locate land and give legal description of it is a who? Who? Excuse me. Who? 88% of you correctly answered from those who did respond, which is far less than 1/2 of the class's amount. Got it correct. B for boy, surveyor. B for boy, surveyor. Number 2, it is essential that every deed be signed by the every deed, as the book said, must be signed by, and 52% of you got it, the grantor. The grantee does not have to sign the deed for it to be valid, but the grantor does. Number 3, title to property transfers at the moment a deed is Title to property transfers at the moment of deed is, and from those who did respond, about 68% of you did get it correct. It is C, delivered and accepted. Not accepted, accepted. Sorry about the typos. Number 4, consideration in a deed refers to excuse me. Consideration in a deed refers to and from those who did respond, 83% of you got it correct. B for boy, something of value given by each party. The buyer gives money, the seller gives a house. Number 5, a declaration before a notary or other official providing evidence that a signature is genuine is an what? Oh, excuse me. And from the amount of people responding, from those who did, 68% of you correctly answered B, acknowledgement. Correct. Number 6, to be recorded, a document must be to be recorded, a document must be, and about 54% of you got it correct. It must be acknowledged. It must be acknowledged. Number 7, what is the purpose of a notary's signature on the deed? What is the purpose of a notary's signature on the deed? And 42% of you correctly answered that it is to provide a witness to, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Sorry. It is A, 50% of you got it correct, to make the deed eligible for recording. A, that's the purpose of a notary signature, to attest to, not the witness to transfer, but to make the document eligible for recording. So there was 3 questions in a row right there about recording documents, acknowledgments, and purposes. And we're going to go into that a little further in the next chapter, so don't worry. It is A. Number 8, determination of the type of deed used in conveying title can be made by examining the Oh, good. I'll wait another second or two before I answer. Determination of the type of deed used in conveying title can be made by examining and 78% of you agreed and got correct. C, granting clause. I did say the granting clause could determine just by reading it which type of deed to use. Yes. Number 9, in some areas, a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors is known as a. I have to read that. And it is known as a special warranty deed. 70% of you did get that correct. A special warranty deed. Number 10. A widow signs a deed giving the farm to his grandson but tells no one and hides the deed. The widower later forgets and sells the farm to a banker who receives the deed and records it but tells no one. The widower dies, leaving everything to his daughter in his will. The deed to his grandson is then discovered. Who owns the farm? Who owns the farm? And from those who did respond, 57% of you got it correct. The banker owns the farm. He got the deed and recorded it. First to record, he's the owner. Everybody else, losers. They got nothing. Number 11, the covenant of quiet enjoyment promises that excuse me, boy, oh boy. Hmm. The covenant of quiet enjoyment promises that 78% of you answered correctly. C, no one will question the buyer's full ownership. Good. C. Number 12, a man executes a deed to a woman as grantee, has it acknowledged, and received payment from the buyer. The man holds the deed, however, and arranges to meet the woman the next day at the courthouse to deliver the deed to her. In this situation, at this time, hmm, In this situation at this time, the answer of which 44% of you got correct was B for boy. The title to the property does not officially pass until a woman is given the deed the next morning. She does not have to record it to be valid. Therefore, B is the correct answer. Number 13, in New Jersey, deeds generally must. Okay. Okay. In New Jersey, deeds generally must. B for boy, 50% of you got it. State the actual sales price of the property being conveyed if they are to be recorded. It has to have a consideration in the deed, what they paid for it. Number 14, the grantee receives greatest protection with what type of deed? The grantee receives greatest protection with what type of deed? 74% of you correctly answered B, the warranty deed. And that, remember, I told you you're going to get a question like that. 15, in New Jersey, a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors act is commonly used. Oh, I see. Okay. Good, got it. In New Jersey, a bargain sale deed with covenant against grantors act is commonly used to transfer property after sale. 67% of you got A correct. It's the most commonly used deed to transfer property at sale. Number 16, the primary purpose of a deed is to. And it's not TWO, it's supposed to say TOO. The primary purpose of a deed is to 27% correctly answered, transfer title rights. Remember I said a deed transfers title rights to property. That's what it does. 17, permanent reference points have been established throughout the United States to simplify surveyors' work. These reference points are called okay, got that. Permanent reference points have been established throughout the United States. Those are called benchmarks. 67% of you got it correct. Benchmarks. Number 18, what assists the surveyor to determine the height of structures and establishing the grade of streets? And that would be 69% of you correctly answered datum. D-A-T-U-M. Datum. Number 19, which of the following methods of describing real property is not used in New Jersey? So which of the following methods of describing real property is not used in New Jersey? 74% of you got it correct. A, the government survey system. Number 20, a plat of subdivision is filed with the plat of subdivision is filed with the county clerk in which the land is located. 85% of you got it correct. Good for you. Number 21, a declaration before a notary or other official providing evidence that a signature is genuine is known as a or an Okay. 68% of you got it correct. It's known as an acknowledgement. There's another question about acknowledgement or recording a document. Number 22, which of the following statements is true? No. Which of the following statements is true? I'm sorry. I forgot. This chapter has a plat that you have to reference on page 338. I'm sorry I didn't give you those directions first, but hopefully you read the chapter and understood what I was talking about. And apparently there have been people that did read the instructions. Thank you. But if you didn't, it's referring to the plat on page 338 in your textbook to understand what these questions are asking. So for question number 22, which of the following statements is true? From those who did respond, good for you, 65% of you got the fact that B is correct. The plat for the lots on the southerly side of Woodridge, I think that's Woodridge Boulevard, and I'm sorry, it says I don't think that's true. It's Goodrich Wolf Road, between Goodrich Boulevard and Cummings and Sheet 4. Yes, that is a correct statement, B for boy. I'm sorry about the typos, guys. There's quite a few of them. I'm going to have the gals sit down and go through all this stuff and recorrect them. Sorry it came this way from Dearborn, and we didn't have time to obviously proofread this stuff. So we'll correct this stuff. So number 23, looking at that same map, which of the following lots has the most frontage on Jasmine Lane? So for the answer, from those who did respond, 80% of you are correct answering C. Lot 7, Block A, has the most frontage on Jasmine Lane. Yes. Number 24, I'm going to read the description while you're looking at the map. Then you can reread it if you need to. But here's the description. Tell me which lots they're describing. So let's describe it. Beginning at the intersection of the east line of Goodrich Boulevard and the south line of Jasmine Lane, and running southeasterly along the south line of Jasmine Lane, a distance of 295 feet. That's your first border. Thence, southwesterly on a course of north 22 east, a distance of 135 feet. Thence, westerly parallel to the north line of Wolf Road, a distance of 195 feet. Thence, north along the east line of Goodrich Boulevard to the point of beginning. Which lots are described here? So from those who did respond, and we didn't have a lot of people responding, 63 of those, 63% of you who did respond got it correct. It's C, lots number 1, 2, 3, and 15 of Block A. That's the lots it's describing. And then the last question regarding that plat is number 1. On the plat, how many lots have easements? Let's see what we got here. On the plat, how many lots have easements? So again, a lot of people not choosing to answer. Guys, it's up to you to decide what you want to do. But from those who did respond, 68% of you correctly identified 4 lots having easements. They are lots number 14 in Block A, 15 in Block A, and number 1 in Block A, and number 15 in Block 8, or Block B rather. Those are the 4 that have easements. And then finally, last question. One method of describing a particular parcel of land beginning with the point of beginning. How does this method complete the description? How does this method complete the description? And from those who did respond, 60% of you did get it correct. It goes back to the A, point of beginning. A is correct. Starts and stops at point of beginning. Meets and bounds method. All right. Let's finish up this chapter and move on. Was there any wrap-up questions before I move on further? I'll be opening up chapter 20 while, if anybody